Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. I'm your host, Lorrie Brook, and together we will get to take a look at what goes on behind closed doors. This is another wrap up episode, and in this episode, we're going to take a look at the conversations that we've had over the past 10 episodes, from episodes 23 over to 32. And boy, oh boy, have we had some great conversations. So please join with me as we take a recap on who and what we have talked about. Episode 23, we spoke to Paula Yolles. Paula spoke to us about her relationship with food, but also how that impacted her relationship. What was it that was showing up for her as to why she turned to food, but also how she was masking it. One of the things we learnt with Paula was how her relationship with food was actually a way of not having to deal with her emotions and actually take stock of what she was feeling and why she was feeling that way. And what she learned when she finally confronted the fact that there was an issue and that she needed to take another step.
So what does soothing yourself with food actually look like? If people are trying to identify if that's them or not, what does that look like?
Well, it can look like different things. For some people, it's binge eating. So they eat a whole bunch and then they don't eat it. And then they eat a whole bunch and don't eat. For some people, it's mindless eating, and that was me on some level. For other people, it's overeating. For other people, it's like nighttime snack attacks. Other people, it's constant eating all day long, like grazers. So it can really look like different things. And for most people, if you're an emotional eater, you're a combination of those things. So for me, it might look like I would wake up and the first thing is I'm already thinking about food. Like, what am I going to have for breakfast? What am I going to bring? I used to be an elementary school teacher. What am I going to pack in my lunch and bring for lunch? And then I'd be at school eating my lunch and being like, do I have time to drive down to the bakery? And if you know anything about elementary school teachers, they don't really have time to do anything. But somehow, because I was so not able to stay with myself and with my emotions, I would figure out how to find the 10 or 15 minutes to run to the bakery to get some cookies, gobble them down on the way back, and then do, teach the rest of the day. So it was just consuming. And then I get home from work, I go straight to the freezer, grab a spoon, eat my ice cream, and then I'd be eating ice cream. Once Ben and Jerry's and I were like best of friends back then. And I'd be eating one spoon after another, going over my day, thinking like, oh, I can't believe I did this wrong. I think I wasn't nice enough to this person, or I can't believe I said that, or I forgot to do that. Just like whatever it is, just beating myself up while I'm eating, but not even really aware that I'm eating. I was like in a trance, sort of a negative beat yourself up trance. And then eventually I get to the bottom and I hear thunk, and my spoon was hitting the bottom of the container. And that's when I would sort of get awake out of my trance. And I've heard so many people say that happens to them, where they'll get to the end of the cookie package and not even realize, they'd eaten all the cookies or the potato chips or whatever it is. Or you can even do it with like a bag of baby carrots. Like it could happen with anything. And then when my spoon would hit the bottom of the container and I'd wake up out of that food trance, that's when a different kind of beating up would happen. Then I'd be shaming and blaming myself. You promised yourself you wouldn't do this again. You did it again. How could you do it? You're just putting on more and more weight, and what's wrong with you? And the whole thing. So it's a whole cycle that I was in that I couldn't figure out any way out of. And I was really unhappy.
So then what happened for you to make that step and go, no, enough's enough?
Well, I really thought it was about the food initially, Lorrie. Like I tried different diets, different ways of eating. I tried taking certain groups of food out of my household, or or avoiding ones that I had to have in my household that I thought I shouldn't be eating because I had a child and I was and so and then and I was putting more and more weight on, and I had a lot of health problems. And so I was really focused on the food changes. And luckily, I have a friend who was brave enough to call me out on the situation because I was emotionally, I was unhappy. I was putting one foot in front of the other, and I was trying to figure out how to change my food to make myself feel better and lose the weight because that's what I thought it was all about. And this friend said to me when we were out on a walk, she said, Paula, I'm really concerned about you. You're putting on more weight and you're getting more and more unhappy. I could have gotten so pissed off at her. Right? Like I could have been like, we're done with this friendship. So, but I paused, even though I was scared, and I was like, I had been pretending to myself on some level that I was okay and functioning on top of it, and I thought nobody could notice, but this friend, knew me well enough. And so I took a deep breath and I told her, you're right, and I have no idea what to do. She didn't have any idea what to do either, but this is what I call my first yes to me, my yes to myself, where I just said, like, you're right. And I started being honest with myself that I was miserable emotionally. I was turning to food and I had no idea what to do.
Do you think you had to be in a particular mindset at that point to hear that and accept that as opposed to getting angry?
Oh, totally. Because it's very easy to deflect if you don't want to deal with, right? So, and I find that even like happens now, like my best friend, one of my best friends, we've been friends since college. And when you have a friendship where you've been friends so long, and like some weeks we talk like every other day, or whatever, like you're going to push each other's buttons. And sometimes, something will come up and I'll be like, I don't want to talk about that, So, yeah, so you have to be in the right mind frame and being willing to be vulnerable with yourself,
So why do you think that day you were happy to actually acknowledge it?
Because even though on some level I wasn't admitting it to myself, I knew how miserable I was. I knew, and the other piece was I was a mom at that point. My son was about 4 years old then, and I knew I wasn't being a really great mom.
In the next episode, I was able to talk to you about conflict and self-responsibility and being responsible for how we are showing up in our relationships. And this is a common theme throughout all of these episodes that we've had here on Relationship Talk so far, is that the number one relationship comes down to the relationship we have with ourselves, and what that relationship is like impacts the relationships we have both on a personal but also a professional level. So even if it's with our partner, with our children, with our friends, with our family, with our work colleagues, that all has an impact based on what's going on inside of us, how we are acting and what we are feeling and how we are addressing those issues.
We've still got to take responsibility for how we are showing up, for how we are reacting to situations. It does not mean that we are accepting or excusing or brushing aside behavior that is inappropriate, not acceptable, and goes against our boundaries. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that we do that. But what I am suggesting is that we need to instead turn around and look at ourselves and go, right, what they did then hurt me. Why am I feeling hurt by that? What is it that that's bringing up for me? Is it bringing up past traumas? Is it bringing up some insecurities that you have? Is it bringing up some fears? And you need to be able to identify that. so that you can take responsibility for how you then respond as opposed to reacting. So when you're in that conflict cycle and it can feel like there's one argument after another, just constantly, and you just don't feel like you can ever get off the hamster wheel. One of the best things that I've found in my relationships is to really take that time out, and not necessarily in the midst of an argument. If you can, that's great. But sometimes you're so much in the midst of it, you don't see that as an option. And that's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it. What you can do, though, is when you've got some time to yourself, the time that I know for me is often the time when I'm replaying those arguments over and over in my head and coming up with all those other different scenarios that you could have said. Why didn't I say that? Why did I say that? Why didn't I say this? Oh, that argument's much better. Why didn't I come up with that? That's the time when, instead of doing those exercises, use it as okay, what's going on for me? And there's three questions that I like to ask myself. The first question that I ask is, why is that triggering me? Why is that triggering me? What is going on that's causing a trigger in me to emotionally react, get upset, get frustrated, feel anxious, whatever it is? Why is that triggering me? The second question, what is that bringing up for me? What past experience, event, situation is that bringing up for me? And then the third thing that I ask myself is, how can I change that dynamic? So why, what, how? How can I change the situation so it doesn't happen again? Now, that last one is going to be different for everyone. It's one of those situations that for me, sometimes it's about letting things go. Sometimes it's about working through past issues so that I can let them go. Sometimes it's about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about just saying, hey, you know what? That situation, you let go of that a long time ago. Stop bringing it up. Sometimes it's about having a conversation and explaining what that brings up for you. So when you use that language, it makes me feel this way because of, and explain it. Because if you've got some significant trauma in your life, and your partner or a friend or a colleague is using language that triggers that and brings it up, you need to be able to identify it, because they might not have any idea that that's what they're doing. So it's about understanding the language and explaining it to them so that they can also change their language if that's not what their intent was.
Episode 25, I spoke to Jyoti Dahnota, and it was a really interesting conversation. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the episode, please do so, because this was a young lady who, actually experienced real frustration and anger and hurt by what other family members did and also did not do. And her way to deal with this in the end was to put pen to paper. Her therapist said to her, write everything down. And those thoughts eventually became a book. And that was her way to deal with what happened. But even in doing that process, she hasn't had the conversation with her family. about what happened. It is easier for her, and she says this in our interview, was to talk to strangers.
Rewind all the way back to 2021, March 2021, when my mom's youngest brother and his family had come to live with us from India. First few months, it was decent. It was doable. The girls would we would all hang out pretty well. But then later came to the realization that he's freeloading off of us. And I was working 3 jobs in 2021. I worked as a teacher, I worked at Outback administrator, and I worked at Dollar General, which is as a cashier. And having that income and being able to care for my family that lives at home and bringing food home and anything, I guess they kind of realized that, oh, she's bringing everything in, so we don't have to work or we don't need to do anything. And right now, even I don't think my uncle is working. He's making his wife work 2 jobs instead.
So let's talk about your book that you wrote on it. How did your mum feel when you said you were writing a book, and what happened?
Actually, nobody in my family knew I was writing that book. So when the Chaos Within debuted, the only person that did know was my cousin, and he's on my dad's side. And it was just because my therapist told me writing is a way of healing.
Yep. How do you feel in terms of your relationship with your uncle now? How do you feel that has, I suppose, changed the dynamics within your family?
Well, I try to limit interactions myself, but because I'm usually with my mom, it's obviously my mom's going to want to sit with her brother. And I feel a lot of people don't realize is that I was really hurt by actions, right? And that's kind of why I'm okay, well, nobody's listening. And now I'm talking to strangers, right? And strangers are listening more than my mom did at that time, right?
Following on from that, my interview with Abigail Luvisi. Abigail was an absolute hoot to have a chat to, and she spoke about the impact of an emotionally abusive mother, and what that was like for her then, not only growing up, but when she had her own relationship, and now as a mother herself, the lessons that she learned and what she went through and how she wants to do things differently. But again, this all started with self-reflection, learning about what happened and how to do things better moving forward.
Back in my childhood relationships, it was very emotionally neglectful and distant, confusing. It was a mind fuck. It's very much of I love you, but there's always something else to the other side. So again, I was raised in a very narcissistic mother, which led me to be in a narcissistic marriage.
Yep.
And when you're not taught those boundaries of what love should look like and what love is, and then I also had this aspect of God being in this spiritual abuse too. Yeah. I think I think looking back, for sure, I just wanted to be loved, and I thought that's just what I was looking for. I wanted someone to love and take care of me. I mean, most of the time when I was a kid, the only times I would really feel loved were when I was sick. So I'd stay home from school. I missed so much school because that was the times my mom would actually take care of me. So, even when I got married to my husband, again, those thoughts were still there. Oh, when I'm sick, you will take care of me. But I mean, that for sure didn't happen. It was the opposite. It's so funny. I think it's funny now because I would because I'm just so loyal that I used to think it was awesome that I didn't leave. Like, I was like, I didn't leave the relationship. Like, I'm teaching my kids like what loyalty is and to be a good wife and to be a good mother. And I look back now and I'm like, I was an idiot. Like, no, like, I can't believe that I used to be like, oh yeah, good on you, Abigail, for not leaving that relationship. Like, no, I can't believe it took him leaving me. I like what? I would never like look at my kids today and be like, that was okay. Never.
But that shows, I suppose, the progression you have made in terms of
Absolutely.
your self-love and your self-worth.
Oh yeah, I would not put up with that shit for a second today. Like my husband now, like like we, you know what I mean? When we were dating, I said that I wouldn't move in with him until he was going to therapy for a year. Like I had huge non-negotiables. And people you hear all the time, they're like, "Oh, like don't set up ultimatums." Like I'm like it's probably like what they say, like my opinion is different than other people, and the fact that I think non-negotiables and ultimatums are okay as long as your motive is in the right place. If it's to keep you safe, then I don't care. Like, who cares then? If it's for you, if you're not doing it to control the other person, then you're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not there to be malicious. You're going, hey, like, I need this to be happening and it needs to look this way to keep me safe. And if not, like, peace out.
Yep. And not just you at the end of the day, too. You had 3 kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to be very mindful of who you're bringing into their life as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I suppose, what do you and Daniel have in place to make sure that when issues do come up, that you are able to slow down and work through what's going on for each of you and then come back together?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really for taking breaks. They say that it takes 20 minutes once you go into fight, flight, and freeze to get back into your frontal cortex. And if we're in our limbic, like we can't think at that point. So we need to cool off. So that's really, what we do. We communicate so much that, I can tell if he's starting to get heightened, and he probably doesn't tell as much when I'm starting to get heightened, because I would say that I am better at that than he. He would agree with me.
Of course he
But he would. But yeah, so usually like I for sure can tell in my body if I'm starting to freak out. So I'm like, all right, like I need to cool off. I need to take 20. And in the beginning, I used to have like systems in place. Like I had a self-compassion creed, and I had this toolbox for myself to, that I would go to if I was getting heated, like to help me get back, right? Like quicker. So I would reach out to a friend, call them. Like I have, now it's just like the back of my hand. But in the beginning, it was difficult, right? Because when we have shame to reach out to people, it can be hard, especially if I did something too. Like if I was the one yelling or the one frustrated, like it's hard to say, like, hey, I fucked up. Like I need help. I need to talk about this. So, but now it's a lot easier.
It is very hard. Like our egos have so much to answer for, don't they? When it comes to the role that we play in our relationships, and not wanting to always be vulnerable or feel like we've made a mistake.
Yeah, well, I mean, vulnerability breeds vulnerability, but the thing is with vulnerability is we have the opportunity to get hurt. So, I can be vulnerable here. Somebody out there might not like what I have to say and could backlash, right? Like that's what we do when we choose to be vulnerable. And at the end of the day, again, vulnerability has the opportunity to breed connection though. And so is it that greater for me to be vulnerable, to have connection, and for somebody to not feel alone? Well, absolutely. Not letting pride get in my way and being able to be vulnerable, and working on myself, being able to accept accountability when I've done something wrong, and also be able to show up too. I mean, that's hard to say a secret. You know what I mean? Like it's just so much more than a secret.
It is, but for others, it's finding that missing ingredient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that I appreciate about all of that. Again, the conversation and the showing up. And, I think that depends on what wounds we have too, right? When that helps us know what our secret ingredient is, I guess, knowing ourselves, because then we're able to fully communicate what we need as well. Because if we don't know what we need, then we don't know. Then we can't communicate it.
Yeah.
Which is then when we went into the conversation of expectations and what are our expectations and actually articulating expectations in our relationships. It is so easy for our expectations to turn into assumptions, to assume that the other person knows what it is that we expect. And that doesn't always happen. And I think there's so many memes and there's so many things going on, on social media about people not being mind readers and spouses not being mind readers to automatically know. But it's true, right? We make lighthearted jokes of it and we try and take the mickey out of it when we can. But it is true that if we don't articulate what it is that we expect and then we get angry about it, it doesn't really make sense. So let's start to take a few steps back and go, hang on, this is what I expect. Can you please do that?
So there's so many areas where we can have these expectations. But what happens is we don't actually communicate them at any particular point in time. We don't say to the other person, it's my expectation that if you see there's dirty dishes in the sink, that you put them in the dishwasher or you turn the dishwasher on. You don't say that it's my expectation that when the rubbish bin is full, I expect you to take it out. I don't want to have to do that. And then what happens when it doesn't take place, when our expectations aren't met, is that we start feeling resentful. We start feeling frustrated. We start feeling angry and upset, and we create these stories inside of our heads about why the other person didn't do what we expected. We often assume that because it is something that we would do, other people would do it as well. What we can also find ourselves doing is saying, well, last week I asked them to take the rubbish out, so this week they should know to just take the rubbish out. But the language we've used may have indicated that it was only a one-off thing. So it is really important when we're having these conversations with our partners that we're being very articulate, that we're being very clear in what our expectations are. And this isn't just about household chores. This isn't about parenting. This is about your relationship as well. What are your expectations in terms of how you are treated in that relationship? What you expect from quality time, from goodwill, from communication. And until we start to learn how to communicate our expectations, we're going to continue on this roundabout of getting frustrated and upset because our expectations aren't getting met and wondering why they don't want to make us happy or make us feel like we're a team, whatever the story is that you're telling yourself inside your head.
I then had a fantastic conversation in episode 28 with Afsaneh Moradian about homeschooling and what an awesome mum to homeschool her child, but to take it that step further and go, you know what? I really want to make sure that they get the best out of this. So what do I need to do to change? What do I need to do to change the way that I'm turning up to make sure that there isn't the constant power struggles? Anna has turned around and said, you know what? I don't want that. I know my child has so much more potential and power and has so much growth and confidence when I can create a situation that removes those power struggles and makes it a more collaborative approach. So if you are homeschooling and you love it, my hat goes off to you. But make sure you take a listen to episode 28 because he will give you some great tips on how you can really strengthen those relationships.
I ended up getting into coaching because I have a high needs child, and I know other parents of, neurodiverse, high needs kids. We don't have a situation where if we ask our children to do something, that they just go do it. Like, put your shoes on, it's time to go. Okay, mommy. No, our kids are like, no, why? I'm not doing that. You can't make me do it. So that then extends into homeschooling, and so many parents get a curriculum that they think is going to be great, start the experience, and then they realize their kids resist. They don't want to do the assignment or the activity, and then the parents don't know what to do, and it takes this dream of something that's supposed to be full of connection and warmth and collaboration and enjoying your child and having fun together. And it turns it into this power struggle so quickly. So what I had to really figure out was, what does this human being need? So if I wanted writing to happen and my child really, so we got into homeschooling because we only had academic preschools available, and we started with that, and my child would just come home and be an absolute monster, and they couldn't handle at the age of 3 being told what to do and how to do it all day long, and learning a 3-year-old being told to write the letter E 16 times. That's like torture. They're developmentally, they can't really do that. So it killed writing for my child. They hated the idea of picking up the pencil and doing, writing any words. It took a very long time to get past that sort of trauma, really, that they experienced at so young. So I had to understand, what did I want my child to be learning? Where were they at? And what did I need to do to get them there, to get that happening anyway? So, there's so many different ways to learn something, right? So if it's writing letters to practice letters, it doesn't have to be with a pencil. It can be with a stick in the dirt. It can be with sidewalk chalk outside. It can, there's so many different ways. And sometimes, I did need to just back off and not try to get them to write letters for a while, because it was just going to trigger a trauma response, and that wasn't going to get us anywhere. And then I had to understand too, like, it doesn't feel good to hold a pencil. So what kinds of things could we do to strengthen those, strengthen their fingers, strengthen their forearms, hanging from monkey bars and things like that go a really, really, really long way to strengthen those muscles. Doing things like making pizza dough and kneading the dough, kneading bread, using, the Play-Doh when they're young, but if you move into modeling clay, plasticine when they're older, it's a lot harder. So it was me. So it's not that I didn't have a benefit as an educator. It's that I had to get rid of my sense of control, because as a teacher, I would plan the lessons. I would decide what was going to happen in my classroom, and it was my job to make sure they all did it. And as a homeschooling parent, it was really thinking about, well, what kinds of things, what kinds of topics, skills do I want my child to learn? And then how can I do that in a way where the emphasis is on the fun and the experience and not on the skills? Really understanding when your child learns best, how your child learns best, what they're interested in, how to make it fun and creative. That makes it really lovely. And I'm telling you, that's not easy to do. That's why I'm a coach. Because if once you get into those power struggles, it is really hard to get out of it. That is a dynamic that becomes so fixed, and it's really hard to even see that you could get out of that dynamic, especially if your child has, those explosions and meltdowns. You're just in it, and you just start to think, oh, I guess homeschooling is just a struggle. I guess it has to be this hard. But it doesn't. It's supposed to be fun for you too, as the adult.
And then in the next episode, I was able to speak to Nicki, and Nicki talked about her relationship, not only with her business partner, but also with her husband and her daughter, and how going through a separation has led to her daughter living in 2 different countries and maintaining and growing those relationships, whilst also running a business from a different country. Can I just say, go Nicki. She has overcome so much and she's still learning about that relationship with herself and growing as her own person.
In terms of your relationship, your business relationship with Stephanie,
Yeah.
what have you found, or what was the one thing, I suppose, that you struggled with that you didn't really think you would struggle with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I suppose the fact that she hates risk of any kind, and she's always very concerned about possible consequences, where I'm more like, let's just go ahead and do it. And if problems arise, then we'll fix it when we get to it. And there's no point in going over 25 different scenarios that might not even happen, where she is really careful and it's like, yeah, but and let's talk about it. Let's not rush into things. So sometimes I feel she could be a bit more carefree, and she's always like, no, you're too much of a thrill seeker, and you're too much of a risk taker, and you need to slow down and let me kind of process everything before you start running. So whenever she says, oh, there's a problem or there's an issue, then my first instinct is to start running and to start coming up with solutions, when sometimes she just wants to kind of get it off her chest, and I immediately assume that she wants me to handle it. So we've decided that I'm not going to do anything if she tells me anything, only when she gives me direct assignment to start doing stuff. Otherwise, I'll just assume she just wants to talk and doesn't necessarily need me to fix it. So
that's awesome. So you've already answered, but what my next question was going to be in terms of how you overcome those difficulties. But to have that conversation and go, hey, sometimes we just need to vent. I don't want a solution straight away. Can you just be a friend as opposed to a problem solver?
Yeah.
How has it been for you to step back?
Well, I mean, at the time when she stepped in, I was really frustrated with the business, and it was kind of growing over my head. It was just too much to manage on my own, to have the household and take care of my family and take care of the business and take care of all the admin stuff and all the planning. So it was really at a great time when she stepped in.
Oh, it's like a constant juggling act, isn't it? Trying to get everything to feel like it's running along smoothly can just feel impossible at times.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many things going on with me the last couple of years, and so many struggles and so many things I had to overcome, that, to be honest, patience has become a bit of an issue. Fortunately, not in my relationship with Stephanie, but especially towards people who are unreasonable or who make problems for me. So I really have difficulty containing myself and not blurt out what the first thing that comes into my mind. So yeah, but I'm hoping it's a phase and I will grow out of it eventually.
But you've been through so much, though, in this last few years, in quite a short period of time. What have you learned to do for you to help you get through those tough times?
I have crippling imposter syndrome. So, and I was married to a narcissist and grew up with a narcissistic mom. So basically, my life has always revolved around other people, and I never really took any time out to decide what I want and what is good for me. Who am I even? I'm not a child. I don't feel like a mother with my daughter not being there. I'm not a business owner. I'm not a wife. I'm not an employee. I'm basically nothing. So I felt like, I feel driftless. I don't have any family. I had some friends, but I mean, I hadn't really had close contact with them living abroad for 10 years. So yeah, I was really struggling and trying to find my own identity. And like in Japanese, you have a phrase for it. It's called ikigai. And ikigai is kind of like a number of things. So it's like your destiny, it's like what you like, what you're good at, your role in life. There's a lot packed up into it. And I felt like I had nothing. So yeah, those were a rough couple of months trying to figure out what am I even doing here. And slowly things started to get better, and I did a lot of contemplating and a lot of introspection and looking back at my relationship, what went wrong and why did we both behave the way we did under the circumstances, and what could I have done differently or better.
In episode 30, I spoke to you about, navigating issues and how we can actually start to address issues, because it is important that we do that. How can we actually resolve some of the conflict that we have going on? And we talked about a few ways that issues, when they do come up, can be faced.
Conflict resolution is not something new when it comes to relationships. We always have to be able to listen and hear what other people are saying and then try and come up with a solution. Sometimes how it's done isn't great. Sometimes we've got slamming of the doors, raised voices, name calling, blaming, finger pointing, all of that. And that is what we call reactionary, or what I call reactionary responses. But what we want to do is we want to make it more, we want to take the reaction out of it, right? We want to be able to actually see and look at the issue for what the issue is. And the way that we can do that is by putting the issue out on the table in front of us. Another great way to do these conversations is to actually set time aside. So when the issue arises, you're not trying to resolve the problem then and there, because often when you're trying to resolve a problem then and there in the process, all you can be doing is butting heads. So when you're doing that, you then also at the same time create an agenda. Okay, so this is the topic that we want to talk about. I'm going to talk about this. You can talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. And then we're going to see what are our options moving forward. How can we actually resolve this moving forward? Be curious. And this is where curiosity becomes your best friend. Ask them questions. Asking questions to actually understand the other person's point of view.
Which is again something that we covered in the next episode when I spoke to Jackie Dickens, the author of Covered. She spoke about her relationship with her husband, her relationship with her kids. She's a mum of 10 kids. No twins, no triplets, 10 kids. And the trials and tribulations of both homeschooling those children, putting some of the children through mainstream school, the ups and downs through her personal relationship with her husband, but also her relationship with herself. And one of the great and most powerful messages that I got from Jackie's conversation was that she had to be okay. She had to know that she was okay with or without her husband, and not in the sense that that relationship was ever going to end, but that he could go through his journey and his issues, and she could go through hers, and that they would still be okay, and that she would be okay as a person.
Yeah, and I know I got curious with myself, like, why do we get mad about that? It happened. I mean, it's not like it's a new thing. It happens. It's even like, why get upset about the laundry? It's our daily life. That would mean that if we're always upset about the things that happen in our daily life, what are we expecting different if we don't respond to it differently? I guess is what I was led to on my journey of like, how can I do this well and teach my kids in the process? because I could see the circle that the vicious circle I was in if I didn't change me. I would be like, why are you responding to this yelling at your sibling when I just yelled at them? Or,
They're great
So,
mirrors, aren't they? They
yeah,
always show you what you've just done and like, oh, next time I'm going to do
yeah,
that differently.
exactly. Yeah. So that was just kind of like, okay, what do I need to do different? Because I couldn't change them, but I could model a different way to them, right? That's one thing that we've learned, to be honest, you know. And then my husband went through a season of like a breakdown depression around 5 or so years ago, between 5 and 9 years ago. And it was a few years long, but I really worked on me, on growing myself, and not being so dependent on him. I realized that I needed to be okay with or without him. You know what I mean? Not in a way like I didn't want to divorce or leave or any type of a thing, but just like if he walks through some things or chooses some things in life, I don't have to ride his roller coaster.
Yep.
I can be okay with just who I am, and then navigating those types of different trials, not only something like that, but anything from a place that I'm okay. So just because this is happening, I don't have to be moved or shaken every time something happens.
We don't have to take on what they're going through at the end of the day. We
Right.
can support them and still choose to go a different path ourselves.
Right, exactly. Yep. And that doesn't mean we have to leave them in any way, or it just depends, on the situation. But
So when
yeah.
you are facing challenges now, do you have a way that you approach those conversations, or is it something that when it comes up, we just deal with it then?
hmm I try to say the words that are on my heart rather than, sometimes I think for a season earlier on in my life, I was afraid to say things. Like I didn't want to rock the boat. But sometimes the boat has to be rocked for the changes to come about. So I try to be honest and real and just speak out what I'm feeling. And one thing that we had learned at one point is, what if instead of, sometimes in conversations, it can feel like whatever we're saying, the opposite person, like it stacks on their shoulder, like an attack almost. And so we've started saying, I'm just putting this out on the table, so that then we can almost look at it rather than either one of us feeling attacked by what's being said.
And then lastly, I spoke to Jennifer Bogard. And I suppose the reflection for her that she had become the emotionally unavailable mother that she had when she was a child. And it wasn't until a counselor pointed that out to her that she realized what had happened. And then her growth from that.
Yes. So my parents are divorced, and I would say that it was, my family life was tumultuous from conception, around maybe third grade, and life kind of started over. So life had been very challenging up to that point, and then my stepdad kind of swept in, and it was like, whoo, life is great now. So my mom and I had been really close when I was little, and then that kind of just shifted, I think, when she got remarried. And it was just kind of lonely growing up. They were not really emotionally nurturing, I would say. And so I felt really just kind of lonely growing up.
So how has that all then played out for you as you've gotten older, you've grown up, you've started relationships, and you've become a parent as well? How has that all played out for you?
Yeah. Well, gosh, I think in a lot of ways, I think probably the biggest way is that I feel like I've just always been on my own. And I never really felt like I had a lot of support. I certainly never really felt like I was, um, like cherished or delighted in, or, anything like that, that you would want that me now as a parent would want, for my own children to feel. And I just always kind of felt like I was on my own. And so I think as a result of that, I'm fiercely independent. It's very hard for me to really trust people, and I think the other piece is not really having a father figure, because my dad was, pretty absent. And then my stepdad, although he was there and was a great provider, and there was lots of great qualities about him, emotionally, he was pretty absent. So there wasn't that aspect there. And I think not having a father figure in that way is pretty impactful for a little girl. Around my 40th birthday, things started coming into focus for me. And I remember my husband took me on a trip, and it was, just the two of us. And I came back from that trip feeling like I never want to go on another trip with him again, just the two of us. And that was kind of a turning point. And I just started focusing a lot on my own unhappiness. I really blamed him, and I just started seeking out all of these resources. I mean, it was my job. I was like diving into self-help. I was diving into my Bible. I mean, I just was from all aspects trying to attack this thing. And I think that at that point was when I started to learn that, happiness really is an inside job. Like, it really, at some point through my evolution, like, that was my main learning, was that I'm really not waiting on anything from him. Like, it really is up to me. And for so long, I had just been like trying to get blood from a turnip, trying to get something from him that I just wasn't ever going to get. And I just used it as a reason to be pissed off all of the time. And I was suffering, and he was suffering, and our kids were suffering, and everyone was suffering. And there was a kind of in my story, like the most impactful part was my daughter was around 10, like around the fourth grade or something. And I had been taking her to a counselor for anxiety. And one day the counselor said, "Hey, I'd like to meet with you alone." I was like, "Okay, great, super." And, I'm going to get an update. And then when we met, she gave me a book that was called The Emotionally Unavailable Mother. And my first response was like, "Oh, wow, thank you. I have one of those." And then I was like, wait a minute, this is my daughter's counselor. Like, I'm the mom, she's giving this to me. And it was just one of those moments in my life where like the room was spinning. And I mean, it was just a moment. Like, she might as well have just slapped me across the face, in that moment. And I was kind of like, oh, and then I think she kind of saw the light come on, and I was realizing like, oh, wait, she's talking to me. And she just was so kind and so gentle. And she just said, "This is going to be hard to read. Just go slow, be gentle with yourself." I mean, she was very, very kind, but I was just like, holy crap, like, what is happening? I never envisioned myself as being emotionally unavailable, but somehow in that moment, I knew that she was right. And I just went home and just really sat with that. Like, how could this be true? And then I just realized like all of my mental and emotional energy is going towards trying to get something from my husband that I'm never going to get. And my kids are suffering. It's like your mental and emotional energy is finite. It's like a pie, it's not unlimited. And I was spending the whole pie on him. And here my kids are suffering. And that was such a wake up call. Like, I look back on that and I'm so grateful for that counselor for that woman. And it was like literally I was walking down one street and I turned and started walking down another. And I was just like, something has to change. A long time ago, I heard this pastor that I respect talk about his parenting philosophy. It's Andy Stanley, saying that him and his wife, like their strategy was always later is longer. Like you're going to have your kids in the house for about 20 years, and then there's later. Like there's beyond 20 years, right? And so you're going to have, like, they have to spend time with you for this first 20 years, but then there's later, and then they don't. And then whenever they're going to see you, it's their choice. Do they want to see you? Do they not? They get to decide, later after the 20 years, which is a whole lot longer than this first 20 years, right? And I had heard this like when they were really little. And so that seemed like that was going to be forever. Well, now my daughter's 17, like we're knocking on the door of that, right? But when I heard that, I that immediately registered for me because I don't really prioritize spending a lot of time with my parents. I mean, I have to have a lot of boundaries around that, and we just don't spend a lot of time together, and I don't really care to. Like, I spend as much time as I care to spend. And I mean, I certainly want to be in relationship with them, and I don't want to be a person who's not in relationship. And I just have to have a lot of boundaries just to take care of my own self in it. And so when I heard them talk about that, it resonated so strongly with me because it's like, yeah, I'm a grown woman now and I'm in later, and no, I don't really choose it. And I want that to be different. And so I have just I've always thought of that later is longer. And I prioritize the relationship like above everything. And sometimes I feel like I err on the side of grace, like ridiculously so, but it has really served me in that. I mean, we do have such a strong relationship. And I feel like it's just grown a real healthy respect. Like I have a healthy respect for them. They have a healthy respect for me.
What do you do for you to keep this, I suppose, learning and coming back and reconfirming your self-worth and how to show up as a better parent and as a better person?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I have lots of rituals and rhythms that are built into my daily habits that I have to do just to show up the way that I want to show up, right? And to feel the way that I want to feel and be the person, that I want to be. I feel like my own identity work has been like the curriculum of my life. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe that's true for a lot of people, but it's definitely been an evolution for me. And it's something that I have to very intentionally work on all of the time. So I try to just hit it from all aspects. I mean, certainly, my physical health is a very top priority for me in terms of my diet and movement and, things like that. In terms of my mental and emotional health, I am very consistent with just number one, my spiritual life. I mean, that's the foundation of everything for me. But also I do what I call self-coaching. So I'm a life coach and I coach other people, but I do self-coaching in that it's just real simple. And I just kind of download my brain onto paper and I'll just, to me, when I do that, I'm getting all of my thoughts onto the paper so that I can see them and I can handle them. And, that just helps me to kind of create some distance from them. So I become an observer of my thoughts and, gain authority over them basically. And just kind of see like, well, that's interesting that I'm thinking that.
Tell me, what do you think the secret is to strong, healthy relationships?
Great question. I'm going to say a couple of things. I think the first thing is really just kind of to your point earlier, it really is nurturing your relationship with yourself. I really feel like it's when you are showing yourself love and grace and compassion, it makes it so much easier to dole that out to other people. And when you are in constant criticism and judgment of yourself, then you're more likely to be doling that out to other people. So I feel like the relationship that you have with yourself kind of sets the tone for the types of relationships or your tendencies in relationship with other people. So I think that's probably the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is to just really be aware of, I call them manuals that we have for other people. I think it's so common for us to have these unwritten rules and expectations of other people in relationship that they don't have any idea about, but yet we're holding them accountable to them. And I think that if we can just, be aware of that and kind of strip that away and just let people be who they are, then, of course, creating boundaries for our own self, right? So that, we can be in relationship in a way that's taking care of me and also taking care of them. But if we can just get rid of those manuals that we have for people and just let people be who they are.
And I think this is one of the most powerful things in these conversations over the last 10 episodes is that each and every one of my guests has been through their own difficult time. And as much as they wanted to put the blame on somebody else or say it's their fault or point the finger, at the end of the day, they've all turned around and went, you know what? If the situation's going to if the situation's going to change, I have to be the one who makes that change. I have to do something different. And that's what I want for you too. If you're ready for that next step, if you're ready to take that change, I really encourage you to come over and take a look at our online program, because that is going to be the first step for you. To figure out that the change comes from within, and that if you want to see change in your relationships, you need to take that first step. You can find out more at therelationshiparchitect.com.au /relationship course. I'll put the link in the show notes. I hope to see you there. And thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. If you can, I would love for you to jump on and leave a review. And whilst you are at it, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please join me again next week when we get to take a look behind closed doors at someone else's relationship. But until then, I am your host, Lorrie Brook, and remember, the choice is yours, so make today and the week the very best it can be.